Imagine taking a multi-million-dollar investment portfolio, rolling it up in a piece of paper, and literally setting it on fire,
Right.
like 3 times a day for 46 years.
It sounds insane, but yeah.
It is insane, but that is essentially what one couple did, sitting right at their kitchen table. I mean, not with actual stock certificates, obviously, but with cigarettes. They smoked 3 packs a day for nearly 5 decades.
The math on it is it's staggering when you actually map it out.
It really is. If they had taken that exact same daily cash, just the money they spent on cigarettes, invested it, and let the dividends reinvest over that 46-year period, their portfolio would have exceeded $2 million.
Wow.
$2 million, quite literally gone up in smoke. And this wasn't some high-flying, Wall Street disaster. This was just a daily, seemingly insignificant habit that fundamentally destroyed their financial future.
Yeah, it's a brutal realization.
It exposes this massive lie we tell ourselves about money, which is that we're convinced wealth is purely a math problem.
Exactly. We treat personal finance like it's engineering. We think if we just plug the right salary into the top of a spreadsheet and then subtract our fixed expenses and hit the sum button, we've somehow, solved the equation.
Which feels great.
It does. It's incredibly comforting to view money through that lens of pure rational mathematics, because math is predictable. 2 plus 2 is always 4. But the reality, and we see this time and time again in the data, is that the spreadsheet completely shatters the moment it collides with human psychology.
Oh, the moment you introduce ego into the mix,
Right.
or social pressure, or, a sudden panic in the stock market, that perfectly calibrated spreadsheet goes completely out the window.
Completely.
So today, we are taking you on a journey into the absolute behavioral muddy waters of wealth accumulation. Welcome to this custom-tailored deep dive. We've pulled together this incredibly diverse stack of sources for you today.
It's a really fascinating mix.
It is. We're looking at psychological profiles of the super rich. From Henley and Partners, we've got behavioral economic research, institutional insights from Mission Fed Credit Union, and Goldsboro Financial Services.
Yeah, and we're weaving all of that together with foundational concepts from some massive bestsellers, like Thomas J. Stanley's The Millionaire Next Door and Morgan Housel's The Psychology of Money.
And the mission here is to basically dismantle what you think you know about being wealthy, because the through line connecting all these totally disparate sources is profound.
It really is. They collectively argue that success with money has, surprisingly, very little to do with your mathematical prowess or your technical investment skill. It is almost entirely dependent on your perspective, your emotional regulation, and honestly, your capacity to endure boredom.
Enduring boredom. I love that phrasing so much.
It's true, though.
Because the conventional wisdom is always that wealth is about the hustle, right? It's the brilliant stock pick, the dramatic crypto trade. But let's start with the absolute baseline of behavioral psychology. I mean, we all know the famous Stanford marshmallow test from the 60s and 70s.
Well, of course.
Walter Mischel puts a 4-year-old in a room with 1 marshmallow, tells them they can have a second one if they just wait 15 minutes, and then tracks their life outcomes. And, the kids who waited ended up with better SAT scores, better health, better financial stability. We've heard it 1,000 times.
Right, it's classic psychology.
But here is my issue with how we talk about that test. We treat it like a cute childhood quirk. We act as if, once we turn 18, we magically outgrow the temptation of the immediate marshmallow.
Which is a totally fatal miscalculation.
Mm-hmm.
We definitely do not outgrow the marshmallow test. The marshmallows just get vastly more expensive.
Exactly.
In Morgan Housel's The Psychology of Money, he introduces this concept that completely flips our societal understanding of affluence. He argues that true wealth is actually the money you do not see.
Okay, wait, explain that.
Well, wealth is the car not purchased. It's the diamond not bought. It's the kitchen renovation that gets postponed for another 5 years. True wealth is fundamentally invisible.
I want to pause on that because it's so counterintuitive to how we are wired as humans. Like, we are very visual creatures. We assess success based on visual cues.
Absolutely.
If I see a guy driving a $200,000 McLaren down the street, my brain immediately logs him as wealthy.
But the only data point you actually have when you see that McLaren is that the driver has $200,000 less than they did yesterday.
Right.
Or, honestly, more likely, they're carrying $200,000 in high-interest debt. You are seeing their consumption, you aren't seeing their wealth. And the invisible nature of true wealth creates this massive psychological friction.
Because if wealth is invisible, How do you signal to the tribe that you're succeeding?
Exactly. How do you get that dopamine hit of social validation?
You don't. And that is exactly where the adult marshmallow test destroys people. I mean, look at the data from the Goldsboro Financial Services source regarding the COVID-19 super early release scheme down in Australia.
That is a perfect example.
During the pandemic, the government there allowed citizens to tap into their locked retirement funds early just to survive the economic shutdown. Now, for people who genuinely lost their jobs and were facing eviction, this was a vital lifeline. It kept food on the table.
Yeah, but the data reveals a much, much darker behavioral trend underneath that.
Huh.
A massive portion of the people who accessed those retirement funds did not use them to stave off eviction.
No, they didn't?
They pulled decades of future compounded growth out of the market and used it for immediate, depreciating lifestyle upgrades. The source explicitly tracks where this money flowed, and it went to new cars, plastic surgery, online gambling, and alcohol.
Unbelievable. Plastic surgery and gambling. They basically took their 65-year-old future self's financial security, threw it in the microwave, and just ate it on a Tuesday afternoon.
That is the adult marshmallow test in action right there.
Okay, let's unpack this microwave analogy, because it's like treating your finances like a microwave dinner versus a slow cooker. The slow cooker requires you to, put the ingredients in, put the lid on, and fundamentally ignore it for 8 hours.
Right.
It requires you to delay the gratification.
The friction here, though, is that society actively penalizes the slow cooker mentality. I mean, the invisible audience of your peers, your neighbors, your social media feed, they all demand the microwave.
They want the results now.
They demand visual proof of your success today.
Which creates a massive contradiction for you and me, because if the guys driving the McLarens and buying the plastic surgery are actually draining the retirement accounts to do it, then what on earth does an actual millionaire look like when they walk down the street?
Honestly.
Yeah.
They look completely unremarkable.
Yeah.
And that is the paradigm-shifting revelation of the millionaire next door. When Thomas J. Stanley and William D. Danko started their research, they were originally hired by luxury brands to profile the ultra-wealthy. So they went to the most exclusive, high-income, blue-blood neighborhoods in America.
To find their millionaire.
Right. And they found people with massive incomes, but surprisingly little actual accumulated wealth.
So they were looking for millionaires and essentially found a bunch of highly paid people living paycheck to luxury paycheck.
Precisely. And they discovered that actual millionaires, meaning people with a high net worth, not just a high income, were disproportionately clustered in middle-class and working-class neighborhoods.
Oh.
Yeah, they drove used, domestic sedans, they wore off-the-rack suits, they live in homes that were valued at a fraction of what they could theoretically afford.
That completely flips the script.
It does. Stanley and Danko ended up categorizing the entire population into two behavioral profiles. The UAW, which is the underaccumulator of wealth, and the PAW, the prodigious accumulator of wealth.
Right, the UAWs and the PAWs. And they didn't just guess at this, they actually created a diagnostic formula. Let's look at the mechanism of this formula because it's brilliant in its simplicity.
The formula is super straightforward. You take your current age and you multiply it by your realized pre-tax annual household income. Then you divide that number by 10.
Okay.
Subtract any inherited wealth, because that doesn't count. And that final number is what your net worth should be right now. So if your net worth is double that expected number, you are a PAW. You're a prodigious accumulator. If it's half that number, you're a UAW.
Okay, let's run a hypothetical so you can see the mechanism in action. Let's say you have a 50-year-old doctor, right, making $250,000 a year. 50 times $250,000 is $12.5 million. Divide that by 10, and you get $1.25 million.
Right.
So that doctor should have a net worth of $1.25 million.
And here's the brutal reality their research uncovered. A massive percentage of high-income professionals, doctors, lawyers, executives, fail the test spectacularly.
Seriously?
Yes. They are classic UAWs. Meanwhile, you can run that exact same formula on, say, a 50-year-old high school janitor making $50,000 a year. His expected net worth is only $250,000.
Right.
But Stanley and Danko found janitors, teachers, welders who had accumulated net worths of $500,000, $600,000, $700,000. They were massive PAWs.
Okay, I have to play devil's advocate here, though. If a surgeon is pulling down over $500,000 a year, how is it mechanically possible for them to be broke? I mean, it defies logic. You would have to actively try to burn through that much cash.
You'd think so.
What is the psychological engine driving that level of consumption?
It's driven by two incredibly powerful psychological forces that the research outlines: the better than theory and the better off theory.
Okay, let's start with better then.
Yeah, let's look at better than first. This is heavily supported by Yale's sociological studies. We do not judge our financial success in a vacuum. We judge it relatively. We look at our nearest neighbors and our closest peers.
So if I live in an apartment building where everyone makes 50 grand and I suddenly make 60 grand, I feel like a king.
Exactly. But the moment you make 100 grand, what do?
I move.
You move out of the apartment and you buy a house in a neighborhood where everyone makes 150 grand. And suddenly, your $100,000 salary feels totally inadequate. You are the poorest person on the block.
Oh man, that's a trap.
Yes. The better than theory dictates that as a UAW's income rises, their perceived necessity to consume rises in lockstep. The doctor doesn't just buy a house, they buy a house in the doctor neighborhood.
Right, which means they're now competing visually with other doctors and investment bankers and CEOs.
The baseline for normal completely shifts. Normal becomes having a European sports car in the driveway and a country club membership. It's a total expectation trap.
But what about the better off theory? Because going through the sources, I found the example of Teddy Friend to be genuinely heartbreaking.
Yeah, the better off theory explains the deep generational psychology of consumption. It applies specifically to individuals who grew up in working class or financially unstable households who then managed to achieve a really high income in adulthood.
Right, they make it.
They make it, but they feel this overwhelming, almost subconscious mandate to prove to the world, and especially to their parents, that they are better off than the previous generation.
Which brings us to Teddy Friend. Teddy grew up poor. He wore hand-me-downs. He saw his parents constantly struggle with money. But he was bright, and he ended up going to a school with affluent kids. And he absorbed this intense, burning desire to one day show everyone that he had made it.
Right? He internalized the visual markers of wealth as actual wealth.
Yes.
And the tragic irony is that the moment Teddy actually achieved a high-income career, that psychological baggage completely destroyed his ability to build actual wealth.
He went all in on the visuals.
He immediately bought a massive high-maintenance home. He financed luxury cars. He bought a boat. To the invisible audience, to his peers, Teddy Friend had conquered the world. He had won the game.
But internally, mechanically, Teddy was drowning. Every single dollar of his high income was already spoken for before the check even cleared. It was all allocated to servicing the debt and the maintenance of his visual illusions.
He treated his income like a renewable resource. That's a really key phrase from the text. UAWs fundamentally believe that money is the most easily renewable resource in the world. They think, I can always earn more tomorrow, so there's zero danger in spending everything today.
Wow. Whereas the PA, the accumulator, views money completely differently, right?
Totally differently. They view money as a tool for buying time and autonomy. They understand that while you can always earn another dollar, you can never earn back the compounded interest the dollar would have generated over 20 years.
So we have this massive societal pressure. We have the better than theory pushing us to compete with our neighbors, and the better off theory pushing us to outrun our childhoods. It takes an incredibly specific type of human being to withstand that pressure.
It really does.
I mean, to make $500,000 a year, live in a modest house, drive a 10-year-old Toyota, and just quietly buy index funds. What kind of person actually does that?
Well, for a long time, the financial industry just assumed they were uniquely disciplined, like they just had iron willpower. But recent data has given us a granular scientific look at the actual personalities of these people.
The Henley and Partners reports, right?
Yes, from 2018 and 2022. They incorporated this rigorous German socioeconomic panel data. They didn't just ask millionaires how they budgeted, they actually subjected thousands of them to the Big Five personality assessment.
The absolute gold standard of psychological profiling. So we're talking about openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. I assume they scored off the charts in conscientiousness.
They did. Millionaires are, predictably, highly organized, detail-oriented, and capable of extreme delayed gratification. They also scored significantly higher in extroversion and openness to new experiences compared to the general population.
Okay.
But the truly revealing data points aren't where they scored high, it's where they scored remarkably low.
And this is where the stereotype of the friendly neighborhood millionaire completely breaks down.
First, they score exceptionally low in neuroticism,
Okay.
meaning they are emotionally flat, they do not panic.
Right.
When the stock market drops 20% in a week, The average person's neuroticism spikes, their amygdala fires, and they sell their entire portfolio in a panic.
Right, they freak out.
The millionaire profile simply ignores it. They possess a psychological stability that completely insulates them from market hysteria. But the second low score is even more critical. Agreeableness.
Wait, they score low in agreeableness, meaning, to put it bluntly, they do not care if you like them.
They do not. They are deeply comfortable with social friction. I mean, think about how much money it costs to be agreeable.
Oh, wow. I never thought of it like that.
Right. Agreeable people have a really hard time negotiating salaries because they don't want to create tension with their boss. Agreeable people go along with the expensive group dinner they can't afford because they don't want to be the odd one out.
Oh, man.
Agreeable people buy the expensive house because they want to fit in with the expectations of their peer group.
That is fascinating. Disagreeableness is essentially a financial defense mechanism.
It is.
If you don't care about societal expectations, you are immune to the better-than theory. You have no problem being the only doctor in the hospital parking lot driving a 2015 Honda Civic.
Exactly. And this personality profile becomes even more extreme when you look at the ultra-wealthy, because the data we just discussed, that was for single-digit millionaires. But Dr. Rainer Zellman conducted this unprecedented qualitative study on the super rich.
And by super rich, we mean
Individuals with a net worth of at least 10 million euros, with most in his sample actually worth between 30 million and a billion euros.
okay, so you can't exactly just send a survey monkey to a bunch of billionaires.
No. He had to sit down and do deep psychological interviews with 45 of them.
So what makes a 100 millionaire different from a 2 millionaire?
Zettelman found that the super rich share that low agreeableness, but they elevate it to absolute systemic nonconformity. They don't just ignore the crowd, they actively prefer swimming against the tide. And this manifests incredibly early in their lives, specifically in their relationship with the traditional education system.
Right. The text notes that there is almost zero correlation between being a straight-A student and achieving extreme, super rich financial success.
Exactly.
Which completely torpedoes the traditional narrative we tell kids, Get perfect grades, go to a perfect college, get a perfect job, become rich.
The traditional education system is designed to reward explicit learning.
Explicit learning.
Right. Explicit learning is the ability to memorize a syllabus, follow the established rules of the classroom, and output the exact answer the authority dummy is looking for. It is literally training for conformity. The super rich, however, operate almost entirely on implicit learning.
Implicit learning being gut feeling, intuition, and trial by fire.
Yes. It's the ability to walk into a chaotic market environment, recognize invisible patterns that aren't in any textbook, and act decisively on an intuition that other people think is crazy.
Wow.
And because they operate on intuition and nonconformity, they fail constantly. But their psychological response to failure is totally unique. When a traditional explicit learner fails, they tend to blame the system. The test was unfair, the professor was biased, the economy was bad.
Sure.
When the super rich fail, they exhibit radical self-blame. They take absolute ownership of the failure, internalize the implicit lesson, and immediately pivot.
But I'm looking at this from the perspective of listener, We are not all aiming to build a billion-euro industrial empire. We just want to be financially secure, maybe retire early, and not stress about mortgage rates.
Right.
If Dr. Zittelman's research shows that the super rich are driven by this almost obsessive need for freedom and independence rather than just buying yachts, how do we reverse engineer that? How does a normal person working a normal 9-to-5 adopt a nonconformist, disagreeable mindset without just alienating everyone in their life?
Well, you don't have to alienate your friends, but you do have to alienate yourself from consumer culture.
Okay.
You adopt the nonconformist mindset by making the active, conscious decision that your future autonomy is vastly more important than your present status. You have to become comfortable with the cognitive dissonance of knowing you could afford the luxury upgrade, but choosing the invisible wealth instead.
That sounds incredibly exhausting, though. To wake up every day and use your sheer willpower to fight off a multi-billion-dollar marketing industry designed to make you spend money?
It is exhausting. And if you rely on willpower, you will fail. Willpower is a rapidly depleting resource. Even the most disagreeable, conscientious millionaire gets tired, gets emotional, or has a weak moment.
Right.
This is why the transition from psychology to mechanics is so vital. You cannot white-knuckle your way to wealth. You have to build systems. Because willpower fades, but systems stick.
I love that. Let's transition from the abstract psychology into the daily mechanics then. We're looking at the institutional insights from FQ Finance and Mission Fed Credit Union, and their entire philosophy is built on the compound effect of systems and daily habits.
Yes.
They make a massive point that wealth isn't built through these intense, heroic, one-off efforts. It's built through excruciatingly boring consistency.
We all understand the mathematical concept of compound interest.
Right.
If you invest $10 a week at a 5% return, the interest eventually starts earning its own interest, creating an exponential snowball. The math is elementary.
Right.
But the FQ Finance source applies that exact same mathematical law to behavioral habits.
Yeah, they use the reading analogy, which I think is great. If you try to read a dense 300-page financial textbook in one weekend through sheer intensity, your brain will completely reject it. You'll burn out and never pick up the book again.
Exactly.
But if you systematize it, if you commit to reading just 10 pages a day, which takes maybe 15 minutes over your morning coffee, the friction is near zero. But over a year, those 10 pages a day compound into 3,600 pages. You've suddenly read 20 books.
The exact same logic applies to financial management. We could look back at the UAW and PAW data from Stanley and Danko to see this habit compounding in action. They didn't just measure how people spent their money, they actually measured how they spent their time.
And the discrepancy is staggering.
It really is.
The average under-accumulator of wealth, the person who looks rich but is actually broke, spends a total of 55 hours and 12 minutes an entire year evaluating their investments or planning their financial future. That breaks down to roughly 9 minutes a day.
They spend 9 minutes a day looking at their financial dashboard.
Yeah.
They likely spend an hour a day scrolling social media looking at what their neighbors are buying. They are completely disconnected from the mechanism of their own wealth.
Wow. Now contrast that with the prodigious accumulator, the PAW. They spend 324 hours and 42 minutes a year on financial planning.
Which is huge.
That is an 83% increase in time spent. It averages out to about 6 hours a week. But here is where I get stuck. I hear 6 hours a week analyzing finances, and I think, I work 50 hours a week, I have 2 kids, I have a house to maintain. You, the listener, probably don't have 6 spare hours a week to sit around reading corporate earnings reports. It sounds like a second job.
Which is why attempting to jump from 9 minutes a day to 6 hours a week is the trap of intensity. You will burn out. The PAWs aren't spending 6 hours a week furiously day trading. They're spending that time maintaining their automated systems and passively absorbing education. The Mission Fed Credit Union source outlines the exact blueprint for this. It all starts with automating your defense.
Step 1. Pay yourself first as a non-negotiable bill. We hear this all the time, but the psychological framing is what actually matters here. You have to treat your savings account with the exact same level of fear and respect that you treat your mortgage lender or the IRS.
If you wait until the end of the month to see what is left over to save, the answer will always be zero.
Always.
Parkinson's law dictates that expenses will rise to meet income. So you remove the decision entirely. You set up the routing numbers so that the moment your paycheck hits, 10% or whatever you can afford, is immediately routed into an investment account you do not look at.
You have successfully bypassed the marshmallow test because the marshmallow was never even put on your plate.
Exactly. And then you automate the debt payments and the utility bills so you never miss a deadline, never get hit with a late fee, and never damage your credit score. You are plugging the invisible leaks in the boat.
But habit number 3 from the source is, I think, the most critical for combating lifestyle inflation, and that's redirecting found money.
Oh, the psychology of found money is fascinating.
Yeah.
When we receive our regular salary, our brain categorizes it as earned and allocates it to our budget. But when we get a tax refund, an annual bonus, or a cash gift, our brain categorizes it as free money.
Yeah.
And human beings are incredibly prone to spending free money on impulsive microwave-style luxuries.
We treat a $5,000 tax refund like a Vegas jackpot instead of what it actually is, which is an interest-free loan we gave the government for a year.
Exactly. The system to combat this is absolute pre-commitment. Before the bonus even hits your account, you must have a system in place that automatically redirects 100% of that found money toward a long-term goal, whether that's a debt payoff or an index fund. If you allow it to sit in your checking account for even 48 hours, the better than theory will find a way to spend it.
That is so true. So you've automated the savings, you're aggressively redirecting your bonuses, and you're keeping your lifestyle flat. Over 5 or 10 years, that creates a massive war chest of capital But cash sitting in a checking account is actively losing value to inflation. To build wealth, you have to actually deploy that capital into the markets.
And the moment you transition from a saver to an investor, you step into a landscape full of complex jargon, highly aggressive fund managers, and massive psychological traps.
Right. This is where we pull from the Goldsboro Financial Services newsletter, because they break down the macro-level strategies of fund management into two distinct camps: value investing and growth investing.
Yes.
Understanding the mechanical difference between these two philosophies is critical, because otherwise you are just blindly throwing money at ticker symbols. Let's break down the mechanics. How does a value manager actually operate?
A value manager is fundamentally a bargain hunter. They're looking for established, high-quality companies that are currently trading at a discount to their intrinsic book value.
Okay.
They are analyzing the company's real-world assets, its steady dividend history, and its consistent sales. The classic examples in the Goldsboro text are major retail banks, consumer staples like Coca-Cola, or legacy tech like Cisco.
It's like walking into a thrift store, finding a genuine designer jacket with the tag still on it, and buying it for $20. You know the underlying asset is fundamentally worth more than the current price tag. You just have to wait for the rest of the market to realize it.
That's a great analogy. Value investing requires immense patience and, returning to our personality profiles, a high degree of disagreeableness, because you are buying companies that the rest of the market is currently ignoring or actively disliking.
Right. And on the completely opposite end of the psychological spectrum, we have growth managers.
Growth managers do not care about the thrift store discount. Not at all. They are willing to pay a massive premium, a very high price, relative to the company's current earnings, because they are buying a trajectory.
They want the future.
They are investing in companies that are expected to expand their revenues and dominate their sectors at a rate significantly faster than the broader economy.
So we're talking about the tech behemoths here. Amazon, Apple, Meta, Alphabet. Companies that don't historically pay big dividends because they take every cent of profit and plow it back into research and development to conquer new markets.
Exactly. And right now, the growth philosophy has created an extraordinarily concentrated and historically unusual market environment. The statistics from the Goldsboro report highlight this imbalance perfectly.
Let's hear them.
If you look at the S&P 500, an index supposedly representing the 500 largest companies in the U.S. economy, the top 5 tech giants alone make up 23% of the entire index's value.
Okay, I want to make sure you grasp the scale of that. 5 companies account for a quarter of the weight of the top 500 companies. That is an incredibly top-heavy ship. And they aren't just big, they are staggeringly expensive. The report mentions their PE ratio, their price-to-earnings ratio.
Yes, the average PE ratio for those top 5 tech giants is an eye-watering 44. To contextualize that, the average PE ratio for the other 495 companies in the index is half that. It's sitting around 22.
Let's translate PE ratio from Wall Street jargon into a real-world mechanism. The Goldsboro report uses a great analogy here. Think of buying a business like buying a local ice cream van.
Okay.
Let's say this van generates $10,000 a year in pure profit. If you buy that van for $220,000, which is a PE ratio of 22, it would take you 22 years of normal profits just to break even on your purchase price.
Which is the market average right now.
Right. But if you buy that exact same $10,000 a year ice cream van for $440,000, a PE ratio of 44, you are waiting nearly half a century to break even.
It's wild when you put it like that.
The only logical reason you would ever pay that massive premium is if you are absolutely convinced that this specific ice cream van is going to figure out a way to sell 10 times as much ice cream next year and absolutely obliterate every other dessert company on earth.
You are paying for the expectation of explosive future dominance. And historically, the market oscillates between rewarding growth and rewarding value.
It goes in cycles.
Yes. The Goldsboro data points out that growth stocks went on a historic tear in the late 1990s, leading right up to the dot-com bubble bursting. But in the years following that crash and leading up to the 2008 global financial crisis, boring traditional value stocks significantly outperformed growth.
So the psychological trap for the investor is recency bias. We look at the last 10 years of tech dominance and assume growth will win forever. But the data says cycles always turn. You don't try to time the market by jumping between the two. You build a boring, diversified system that holds both.
Exactly.
But recently, a third variable has entered the investment landscape, and it's not based on math at all. It's based on morality. I'm talking about ESG investing.
Environmental, social, and governance investing. It is one of the fastest growing sectors in global finance right now.
The foundational idea is noble, obviously. Investors want to deploy their capital into companies that are actively trying to solve global problems, or at least not actively making them worse.
They want to avoid the tobacco companies, the weapons manufacturers, and the major polluters, and instead fund renewable energy, fair labor practices, and diverse corporate boards.
It sounds perfect. It appeals to our best nature. But as the Goldsboro source points out, the mechanics of ESG are an absolute ethical Wild West right now.
Total Wild West.
I look at ESG today the exact same way I looked at the organic food label in the grocery store 30 years ago. Back in the early 90s, a farmer could spray his tomatoes with 10 different chemicals, skip one specific pesticide, slap a green organic sticker on the box, and charge you double. Because there was no global, standardized regulatory body defining the word.
That is the precise danger of ESG right now. It is largely self-regulated by the financial industry. You might buy into a massive Wall Street ETF that heavily markets itself as a sustainable green energy fund.
Sounds great.
But when you actually open the hood and look at the holdings, you might find mining companies that dig up the rare earth metals needed for solar panels using questionable labor practices in developing nations. Is that ethical?
I love the million-dollar question. And the source poses a brilliant hypothetical to highlight this friction. Imagine you are a highly conscientious investor. You want to fight climate change, so you invest a portion of your portfolio into a sustainable, renewable timber company in Australia. It ticks the E for environment perfectly. They plant trees.
But then, a massive drought hits. And it is discovered that this specific timber company's forest management practices, perhaps they didn't clear enough underbrush to save money, significantly contributed to the spread of a lethal, catastrophic bushfire.
Oh, man.
A fire that destroyed native habitats, burned down towns, and left hundreds of people homeless.
The ethical paradox is just devastating. You invested your money to save the planet, and your capital mechanically funded a disaster. Now, we aren't taking a stance on whether ESG is good or bad. We're just reporting what the source material is highlighting about the complexity.
Right, which forces us to confront a very uncomfortable reality about modern finance.
Yeah.
You cannot safely outsource your morality to a Wall Street marketing algorithm.
Yeah.
If a fund manager slaps an ESG label on a product, they are doing it to attract your capital, and often to charge a higher management fee. If you truly want your money to align with your personal ethics, it requires deep, intensive manual research. You have to read the prospectus, understand the supply chains, and define what ethical actually means to you, because the market's definition is entirely fluid.
It requires you to act like a paw. It requires you to actually spend the time. Okay, let's step back and look at the timeline of life here. We've mastered the psychology of delayed gratification. We've ignored the neighbors. We've automated our savings into a diversified portfolio of value and growth. We've navigated the murky waters of ESG. Decades pass. The compounding snowball does its work. We arrive at the end game, retirement.
And the moment you cross that finish line, the rules of the game completely invert.
Completely.
During your working years, the goal is accumulation and shielding your money from taxation. In the end game, the goal is decumulation. Navigating an incredibly complex legislative bureaucracy and managing the psychological burden of generational wealth transfer.
Let's start with the legislator hurdles, because the Goldsboro text highlights how quickly the ground can shift beneath a retiree. They look specifically at the Australian superannuation system, but the mechanism applies to tax-advantaged retirement accounts globally. The rules are not set in stone. They are subject to the whims of politics.
Yes. The source notes a specific, incredibly frustrating legislative gap that occurred recently. The government rightfully recognized that people are working later in life, so they moved the age where you can make contributions to your retirement fund without passing a work test up to age 67.
Which is a win. It gives people 2 extra years to stuff money into their tax-advantaged accounts.
Yes, but simultaneously there is a mechanism called the Bring Forward Rule. This rule allows a retiree to essentially dump up to $300,000 into their account in one massive lump sum by bringing forward 3 years' worth of future contribution limits.
Okay, that makes sense.
It's a vital tool for someone who just sold a business or downsized a house, but the legislation regulating that specific rule was left stuck at age 65.
Creating a legislative no man's land. If you are 66 years old and you just sold your small business, you are sitting there with a pile of cash waiting on a paralyzed parliament to reconcile two competing laws just so you can fund your retirement. It proves that you cannot just build a financial plan at age 40, put it in a drawer, and assume the math will hold up 30 years later.
The friction of the system requires constant vigilance.
It does. But the bureaucratic friction of retirement accounts pales in comparison to the emotional and financial complexity of aged care.
Oh, absolutely.
This is the stage of life where the clean logic of the spreadsheet violently collides with the deep emotional attachment we have to our physical assets.
We're talking about what to do with the family home when the parent needs to move into an assisted living facility.
Right, and the Goldsboro text walks us through a specific mathematical scenario that is so counterintuitive it almost feels like a typo. Let's look at the mechanics. Imagine a single retiree named Frank. He can no longer live independently and is approved for residential aged care.
Okay, let's lay out Frank's balance sheet. He owns a family home with a current market value of $700,000. He has $100,000 in liquid cash in the bank and maybe $5,000 worth of personal contents.
Okay.
The aged care facility he wants to enter requires a refundable accommodation deposit, the RAD, of $550,000.
So if you present this scenario to 100 people on the street, 99 of them will give you the exact same logical answer. Frank needs a $550,000 deposit. He has a $700,000 house that he is never going to live in again.
Right.
The solution seems obvious. You sell the house, you write the check for the deposit, and you put the remaining $150,000 in the bank to earn interest. It's clean, it's simple.
It is logically simple, but mechanically it is a financial disaster. To understand why, you have to understand how government welfare systems, like the age pension, calculate wealth. Think of the government's asset test like a massive set of scales. On one side of the scale, you have liquid assets, cash in the bank, stock portfolios. On the other side, you have physical property, specifically the primary residence.
Okay.
Government systems universally penalize liquid cash far more aggressively than they penalize a primary home.
So the moment Frank sells the house, he takes $700,000 off the protected property side of the scale and dumps it entirely onto the exposed liquid cash side.
Exactly. Let's look at the numbers from the sells house column in the analysis. Frank sells the home. He pays the deposit. He invests the remaining cash. That invested cash generates about $16,900 a year in income.
Okay, not bad.
But because his liquid assets have now skyrocketed, the government cuts off his age pension entirely. So his total inflow is just that $16,000.
But his outflows explode, right?
Right, because the aged care facility also means tests his liquid assets. They look at his massive bank account and charge him the maximum daily care fee. His total outflows hit over $40,000 a year. Frank is now running a deficit of over $23,000 annually. He is rapidly bleeding out his remaining capital.
Wow. Okay, now let's look at the alternative mechanism, keeping the house and renting it out.
If Frank keeps the house, the government rules treat that asset entirely differently. Under the specific regulations outlined, if the former home is rented out to pay the daily care fees, its assessed value for the pension test is artificially capped.
So it doesn't matter what the market says.
Right. It doesn't matter that the house is worth $700,000 on the open market. The government only assesses it at around $171,000.
The scale is completely rebalanced.
Furthermore, for the first 2 years, the home might be entirely exempt from certain asset tests. Let's look at the keeps and rents column. Frank's investment income from his original bank account drops slightly, but he is now generating $20,000 in rental income.
Okay.
And crucially, because his assessed assets are now artificially low, the government turns his age pension back on, paying him nearly $16,000 a year. His total inflow jumps to over $38,000.
And what happens to the outflow, the fees the facility charges him?
They plummet. The facility looks at his artificially low assessed assets and drastically reduces his means-tested care fee. His total outflow drops to $34,000. Instead of bleeding $23,000 a year, Frank is now running a $4,000 annual surplus.
He is cash flow positive. It's the exact same human being, the exact same net worth, the exact same aged care facility. The only difference is that in scenario B, he understood the invisible mechanical friction of the tax code. But I have to say, it's not just a math equation. Keeping a $700,000 house requires someone to act as a landlord. Someone has to fix the hot water heater when it breaks on a Sunday. Someone has to deal with tenants. Usually that burden falls to the adult children.
Which brings us to the final and arguably most psychologically complex phase of the wealth journey, the intersection of accumulated wealth and adult children. How do you pass the baton without dropping it?
We are returning to the research of Thomas J. Stanley in The Millionaire Next Door for this, because they identified a phenomenon that is absolutely devastating to generational wealth. They call it economic outpatient care, or EOC.
EOC refers to the very common practice of affluent parents providing regular, substantial, ongoing financial subsidies to their adult children. We aren't talking about paying for college or a one-time wedding gift. We're talking about parents paying the down payment on the kid's house, supplementing their monthly income, buying them cars, or paying for the grandchildren's private school.
And the tragedy here is the intent. The intent is rooted in pure love. The parents spent 40 years acting like paws. They drove the used cars. They endured the boredom of compound interest. They lived below their means. They conquered the marshmallow tests so that their children wouldn't have to struggle the way they did.
But the data reveals a brutal psychological truth. By removing the struggle, the parents systematically destroy the child's ability to develop their own financial muscles.
Yeah.
The statistics on adult children who receive economic outpatient care are staggering. The research shows that EOC recipients actually generate roughly 98% of the income of their non-subsidized peers.
Meaning they go to college, they get good jobs, they earn basically the exact same salary as the kid sitting in the cubicle next to them who gets zero help from mom and dad.
But their balance sheets tell a completely different story. Despite earning the exact same income, the EOC recipients possess, on average, only 57% of the accumulated net worth of their peers.
I need to wrap my head around that mechanism. They are earning a full salary, and they are receiving thousands of dollars in free cash from their parents, yet they are half as wealthy as the kid who gets nothing. How does the money just vanish?
It vanishes because of how EOC violently distorts the adult child's perception of reality. When a child receives regular cash infusions, they do not view that money as a windfall to be invested. They absorb it into their baseline perceived income.
It inflates their denominator. If they make $60,000 at their job, but mom and dad give them $20,000 a year, their brain acts as if they have an $80,000 salary.
Exactly. And they consume based on that $80,000 illusion. The book provides a startling metric that was prevalent at the time of the study. 30% of American families living in homes valued at $300,000, which was a significant luxury threshold back then, were only generating an annual earned income of $60,000.
The math on that mortgage is impossible. The only way they're staying afloat is the invisible umbilical cord of EOC.
But it's worse than just the mortgage. A luxury home demands a luxury lifestyle to match it. The better-than theory infects the children. If mom and dad buy you a house in an affluent neighborhood, you are now surrounded by neighbors who actually earn $200,000 a year.
Oh, wow.
You feel compelled to lease the luxury SUV to put in the driveway, to buy the premium furniture, to take the expensive vacations. The parental cash doesn't create security. It acts as seed capital for extreme lifestyle inflation.
The parents have unwittingly subsidized the creation of a massive underaccumulator of wealth. They have trained their child to fail the marshmallow test. It completely robs the child of the implicit learning we talked about earlier.
Right.
If the super rich build their resilience by failing and taking radical ownership of that failure, the EOC recipient never gets to fail. If they overspend, mom and dad bail them out. The friction is removed, and without friction, there is no growth.
It brings everything we've discussed full circle. It proves that building wealth, maintaining wealth, and successfully transferring wealth are not accounting problems. A spreadsheet cannot account for the ego of a UAW, the disagreeableness of a paw, or the toxic comfort of economic outpatient care.
It is entirely behavioral. So let's step back and look at the massive landscape we've covered today. What is the actual definition of wealth based on this stack of sources? True wealth is invisible. It is the money you actively choose not to spend.
It is built on a foundation of excruciatingly boring, highly automated systems that remove willpower from the equation.
It requires a personality that is emotionally stable enough to ignore market panic and disagreeable enough to reject the social pressure of the better than and better off theories.
It requires an understanding of mechanical market cycles, value versus growth, and a deep skepticism of Wall Street marketing labels like ESG.
And ultimately, it requires the wisdom to understand that removing financial friction from your children's lives is often the fastest way to destroy their future resilience.
It is the ultimate rejection of the microwave culture.
But as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final thought. a concept to wrestle with over the next few days. Because the environment we are operating in today is fundamentally different from the one Thomas J. Stanley studied in the 1990s.
Very different. The foundational premise of the PAW is that wealth is hidden. The millionaire next door could hide their frugality behind a quiet, middle-class, suburban life.
All right.
But we are now existing in a hyper-digital, permanently connected era. Social media does not merely encourage consumption, it demands visibility. It demands performative lifestyle inflation.
The Yale better than theory used to mean comparing yourself to the guy who lived literally next door to you. If you bought a Honda, you bought a Toyota. But today, because of the phone in your pocket, your neighbor is a 22-year-old crypto billionaire in Dubai posting videos from a yacht.
The baseline for comparison has been artificially inflated to an insane global scale.
The pressure to consume, to eat the marshmallow today, just to generate content and signal status to an invisible digital audience, is ubiquitous. It is in our pockets every waking hour.
It is.
So the provocative question we leave you with is this. Are we entering a psychological era where building true, invisible wealth is actually harder than at any other point in human history?
That's a great question.
Not because the math is harder, investing has never been cheaper or more accessible, but because the psychological friction of nonconformity has never been higher.
It's a profound challenge.
I encourage you to audit your own life this week. Look at your bank statements, look at your subscriptions, look at the car in your driveway. Ask yourself the uncomfortable question. Where are you performing for the invisible audience? Where are you demanding the clean, calculable comfort of the spreadsheet when you should really be preparing your mindset for the behavioral muddy waters? Because navigating those muddy waters with patience and a healthy dose of disagreeableness is the only place true wealth is actually found. We'll see you on the next deep dive.